Okay, so we are going to jump into Autodesk Maya 2014. So the school just got the software finally, and I'm pretty excited because there's a lot of cool new features inside of it, which we really won't be covering today, but we will as the course goes on. All right, so to launch Maya, you're just going to go into the desktop here, click on the Start icon. And easiest way to do it, you can do it by going to the program group. So you could go all programs. I'll show you both ways. You could go to all programs, Autodesk, Autodesk Maya 2014, and launch it right there. Or easier than that would be to just click on the Start button and then just type Maya into the Start menu. And boom, it's going to pull it up right there at the top, Programs, Maya 2014. I'm going to go ahead and click that to launch it, and you guys should do the same thing. Comes up, and this is how you know you have a fresh set of preferences. And I'm not really going to discuss that today, but we'll get into that later. You'll know that your prefs are clean because these two dialogues will come up. So this is the first one, what's new in Maya, highlight what's new, show this at startup. I'm going to leave this on for a little bit just because I haven't been using Maya 2014 day to day either. And so I kind of want to be reminded of what the new features are. So I'm going to leave that on for a while, and then once we get used to it, we'll turn it off. So I'm going to say OK there. And then you also have these startup movies, so 1-minute startup films. If you don't like the videos that I do, these are probably a lot faster and more condensed. You can just watch these, and they're kind of going to do the same thing for you that I'm about to do. I tend to be a little bit long-winded and go way into depth, which I think puts some of you to sleep, but I don't know. That's how I learn, so I like to know things inside and out. So I'm going to go ahead and close this one, and then I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my Maya is maximized. And we can see here this little green bracket. That is basically telling us, hey, this is a new feature in Maya 2014 that wasn't in Maya, whatever version you were previously using. And so that's all that these brackets are going to do, and they just kind of point us in that direction. All right, so this is the Maya interface. It looks a little daunting at first. It's kind of like the cockpit of a 747 is what I liken it to, because you have all these different controls. So 3ds Max was complicated, but this one is maybe about, I don't know if I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say maybe Maya interface is about twice as complicated as the Max. But really, though, you shouldn't get intimidated or scared because it's really just, all these are is buttons, and the buttons enable you to do things. It's just that in Maya there's a lot more buttons because there's a lot more features. Okay, so we're going to start up here on the top. So this tells us what version of Maya we're running. We're running Autodesk Maya 2014 x64 educational version. All right, cool. Below that we have the familiar Windows-based text drop-down menus. Okay, you've seen these in pretty much every piece of Windows software usually has this. All right, so you'll hear me refer to this as the text-based menus. All right, so the text-based menus are the same as in any other program. You just scroll them. Over here we have File. So File is where we'll go to create a new scene, where we can go to open a scene, where we go to save a scene, where we go to save a scene as, or sometimes, occasionally, we're going to import geometry. And so importing is when you take a piece of geometry or a file from another program, such as 3ds Max, and you're going to import it into Maya to get Maya to recognize it. Okay? So I'm not really going to save anything just yet, because why? I haven't done anything. So, but that's where you go to do it. So we also have edit. That's where undo and redos are. So if you like to do things through the text-based menu set, that's cool. You can also undo by just hitting Control-Z, or I think it's Control-Z and Shift-Z, if I remember correctly, for redo. I don't ever use redo, so if I got that one wrong, you can.
Control-R.
It's Control-R?
Y.
Y? Okay, Control-Y. I don't ever use it, so you can sue me for not knowing that one. Okay, so these are the drop-down menus. Today we're going to concentrate mainly under the Create tab, and we're going to create a bunch of polygon primitives. I'm going to start out by creating a polygon sphere. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Once I hit, so if you'll notice, I went to create, then I went to polygon primitives, sphere. Notice what happens. My cursor changed from an arrow to this cursor that kind of has this little plus icon, and then it's got like a little thing below that, which is kind of giving me a hint as to what the software wants me to do. So, and down here below in this little help panel, if there were relevant help for that, it would say something like, click to create a polygon sphere. In this case, it doesn't say anything. It just says polygon sphere tool, no help available for this tool. And the reason for that is because this tool is so simple that a monkey could literally operate this. All right, so I am now in create polygon sphere mode, and I know that because this icon right here shows the icons for a sphere. And so what this little icon here to the left is it's always going to be whatever the recent command is that I'm using. In this case, it's create sphere. All right, so now that I'm going to do that, I'm going to go in here and click on my grid, and I'm just going to drag, and that's going to allow me to make a sphere of my desired size. Okay? So rather than going over this entire menu interface, what I've learned teaching 3D is that the first thing people want to do is they want to explore the 3D windows. And so I always teach you guys how to do that first. And then we'll go ahead and branch out to the outside. So this is the 3D interface. I have just created a polygon sphere. My sphere is currently in wireframe mode, and you can see that because it's not shaded. You can see all these green wires. If I want to see it in shaded view, I have a number of options to do that. One of the options is I can go up here. These are the drop-down menus for my view panel. So currently, the view that I'm in is perspective, and you can see that because it says right down here, perspective view. Okay, and then these are the menu controls for this perspective view. Now, nifty little thing up here is they give us these little GUI icons. What do I mean when I say GUI? What is a GUI? Yes?
Graphical user interface.
Graphical user interface. So it's just GUI. It stands for graphical user interface. So within Maya, just like other software and other 3D software, there's usually a text-based drop-down menu for a feature, and then there's also a GUI version to drive that same thing. In Maya, the convention is typically there's a text-based menu for everything, and then there's a GUI version for just some portion of those things. The reason for that is because they really don't have enough room to fit all these features and functions into picture icons down here. So what they tend to do is they take the picture icons that are most used and then give you a GUI representation of that. All right, so if I want to see my sphere here in shaded view, currently I am in wireframe. So here's the GUI section of the interface where that controls that. So currently it's in wireframe. If I want to see it shaded, I'm just going to go one icon over and click on it, and there we go, shaded view. And if I deselect it, we can see here it's only shaded. If I want to see shaded with a wireframe representation on top of it, I can click on this button, and that's wireframe on shaded. So similar to 3ds Max, those are the three. The one to the right of this is to show textures. We don't have any textures on this, so it's not going to do anything. This one would be the one that you would hit if you, say, assigned a picture to this and you wanted to see that picture mapped on to the object. For today's class, we're just going to focus on these three: wireframe, shaded, and then wireframe on shaded. I'm going to switch mine back to just plain old shaded view and then deselect. Okay, so we've created a sphere. We've shown you how to shade it. You can also shade it using your hotkeys, which is kind of nifty. So if you don't like using the GUI up here, you can also hit the 4 key, which will turn you to wireframe. If you hit the 5 key, that'll take you back to shaded. And I don't believe there is a hotkey for wireframe on shaded, and I wish they'd put one in, but they just don't do it. All right, so there isn't one. So you have hotkey wise, you have 4 and 5, and then 6 would be textured, but we don't have any textures. So I'm going to go back to 5. Okay. Now you might be wondering how to navigate this view. And there's a number of ways to do that also. So the easy way that some of you guys like, which advanced users like myself really don't like, but I'll show you for the noobs, is this guy right here. This is called the view cube, okay? And the way this thing works is it has kind of this cube that represents top, front, right, etc. But if you just click on this guy and hold down, it takes you into this orbit mode where you can kind of orbit around the scene. So it allows me to orbit around my object, which is kind of nice. I can also click on the front and it'll take me to the front of my object. I can click on the top, it'll take me to the top of my object. I can go to the right, or I can click on the home button, which will just take me back to the default view. That's one way. Okay, and that guy right there is called the view cube. If you want to try this another way, you can use the hotkeys. And they are Alt plus left mouse button. So hold down your Alt key plus your left mouse. And that will allow you to orbit. You can do Alt plus your middle mouse button. And that allows you to track or pan, so you can pan your view left and right. And then we have zoom. You can zoom a couple of different ways. You can zoom just by rolling your scroll wheel in and out. Or you can also hold down the Control and Alt keys simultaneously. Hold down your middle mouse button. Oops. Hold on. Is that one that got changed on me? Oh, there we go. Hold down your Alt key alone, and then hold down your left and middle mouse buttons simultaneously, and you can zoom in and out as well. This one is what's referred to as a fine zoom, so you can kind of zoom to any degree. The trackball is more of an incremental zoom. It's going to zoom in increments of some set units. In this case, it's probably like snaps of 5 or 10, or something like that. You can also, they changed Maya on me a long time ago, and so it used to be that you can hold down the Alt key with the left and middle mouse to zoom in and out. And then somewhere along the line, they changed it to you can hold down the Alt key and, hold on, it's a little tricky. There it is, and the right mouse button alone. So I'm old-fashioned, and once I learn something a certain way, I tend to just keep doing it that way. So it's a struggle for me to teach you guys every single option under the sun. But some people like it. It's just Alt right mouse to zoom in and out. I still do it the old-fashioned way, which is Alt left and middle. And that, honestly, that's probably harder to do it that way. So yeah, don't be like me. I'm used to it though, so that's the way I do it. Okay, so we have orbit. That's Alt left. We have zoom, which is Alt right or Alt middle and left. And then we have pan, which is Alt middle. That's it. Awesome. If you ever want to get back to, so I'm going to kind of mess my view up here. I'm going to move my sphere off the frame. If you ever want to get back to your home view, you don't have to do it by clicking on the home up here. You can also just hit the F key. And what the F key will, it will frame whatever's in your scene back centered right there with your camera. So the cool thing also about the F key is that I'm going to make a duplicate of this sphere here. And I'll explain how I'm doing this moving forward. I'm just doing this so I can demonstrate something. So I'm going to make another copy. Another cool thing about the F key is that if nothing's selected, so I have nothing selected, and I hit the F key, it's going to frame all of my objects in my scene. If I select one of the objects, though, and then I hit the F key, it's going to frame just that object. The way you select and deselect things in Maya is ridiculously easy, hence I often forget to explain it, so I'm not going to forget this time, is you just click and drag, and this is called a marquee selection. So see that little box? That's called a marquee, that little marching ant looking thing. So we just click and drag our marquee around the object. That'll select an object. If we want to deselect objects, it's very easy. It's so ridiculously easy, it probably will be hard at first. You just click anywhere in the void, and it's going to deselect everything. Okay, so if I hit the F key with nothing selected, it's going to frame everything in my scene. If I select any number of objects, so I'm going to just select these two, hit F, it'll frame those two. If I select any one of them and hit the F key, it's going to frame that one object. We can also select things by not using the marquee, but by just clicking, selecting things. So if you just click on something, it will select it as well. You don't need to do the marquee in order to select an object. You can actually just click on the actual object itself. Okay, cool. So, and then I deleted everything in my scene by selecting it and hitting the delete key. And then if I hit the F key, it's just going to frame me back up on my grid. Okay, so now let's talk about how to manipulate objects in our scene. And then once we've covered this, then we'll go back out into the interface and I'll show you what everything is. Okay, so we're going to go back in to the Create under the Create drop-down menu set here. And I'm going to say Polygon Primitives. I'm going to do another sphere. I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and if you'll notice, if I do that, it's going to draw the sphere from the floor rather than from the middle. So that's kind of nice. So I'll do that again. I'm going to go ahead and say Create Polygon Primitives, Sphere. If I just click, notice how it's going to draw the sphere out from its center. Okay, I'm going to do it again. This time, if I hold down the Shift key, it's going to draw it from the floor up, which is kind of nifty. All right. And that also works for other things. So if I go and say Create Polygon Primitives, and I do a cube, if I create the cube, by default, it's going to allow me to draw the base of the cube first, and then the next click is going to draw the height. But if I hold down the Shift key, it's going to make that cube completely square, which is kind of nifty. And again, it's going to draw it from the floor upward. Okay, so now I'm going to create a sphere here. I got a cube and a sphere. And you might be saying to yourself, well, that's cool, I've created this, but how do I manipulate it? And then I'm going to answer you. The way we manipulate stuff in Maya is we can either move things, we can scale things, and we can rotate things. So move sometimes is also referred to as translate. So there's translate, scale, and rotate. Okay? Yeah, so I'm going to select my object here. In this case, it's my box. And if I want to move it, I'm going to first show you how to do it through the GUI, and then I'll tell you the hotkeys for it. So these over here are your tools. The first one is just the select mode. So select tool, if you hover over anything long enough, it'll pull up a little help hint and tell you kind of what it is, what it does. So the first one is the select tool. In Maya, by default, it opens in select mode. The one below it is lasso select, which we'll get into later. I'll just show you what it is. It's kind of like in Photoshop where you can use the lasso and draw an irregular selection. That's not going to be really useful for us in our first assignment. It will be later, though, when we get into pulling vertices and doing sub-object manipulation. And then the one below that is the paint selection. That allows us to paint selection. These, again, are not very useful right now, but will be more useful as we get into sub-object modeling. Okay, now let's get down to the meat of the tools. Below that, we have the Move tool. So the Move tool will, if you'll notice, I go to Move. See this little icon that shows up now when I select things? It's got this little gizmo here in the center. And that little gizmo just allows us to move that object in space. So it works just like 3ds Max does. We have the transform gizmo. If I grab on the middle one, it's going to allow us to move this little yellow square. It's going to allow us to move in 2 dimensions simultaneously. But watch what happens if I highlight one of these axes individually. So notice that each axis will light up, and that tells me what my active axis is. So if I want to move this thing in Y only, all I have to do is hover my mouse over the Y axis. When it lights up in yellow, I grab it and I'm moving. Constrained now, this is called constrained movement. I am now constrained in Y. Okay, so if I want to constrain my movement to X, I can select the X axis, move it. If I want to constrain my movement in Z, there we go. And then again, if I want to move all three, in this case, Maya doesn't allow all three. It just allows 2 at a time. And so now I'm probably moving in Y and Z, something like that. All right, so that's move. It's pretty straightforward. Below that, we have rotate. So I'm going to click on the rotate tool. And if you'll notice here, we get this little gizmo. And same deal, you can constrain your rotation in an axis by simply highlighting that axis. So in this case, I'm going to rotate my box here, constrained in Z. I can constrain it in X or constrain it in Y. If I don't like any of those movements, I'm just going to hit the Z key a bunch of times, which is going to undo me back to my initial state. We also have this little guy here, this blue one. Does anyone have any idea what that one might do? There is one that's freeform. Freeform is if I click inside of this little ball here, that will freeform allow me to rotate. I don't recommend using that because the object gets away from you really fast. The blue one though, any guesses what that thing does? Yes, the blue one is going to rotate perpendicular to whatever your camera view is. So imagine an axis, a line, projecting straight out from your camera lens. This guy is going to rotate in an axis that is perpendicular to that ray projecting from your camera. This one is very useful from time to time. I use it a lot, but it takes a little getting the hang of. So typically you're just going to do constrained in X, Y, or Z until you get a little bit more comfortable with the software, and then you can start playing with. I really don't recommend using this one. That's called gimbal, and gimbal will rotate in all 3 axes, and it's like uncontrollable. Okay? All right, and then finally we can scale things, and that's right below the rotate tool. And I'm going to click on scale here, and same deal as the other ones. We get this little icon here, which shows the 3 different axes we have available. We can scale something constrained only in Y, constrained only in X, constrained only in Z, or if we click on the third cube here in the middle, this little blue one, that is going to uniform scale everything. So that's all axes at the same time. So we have uniform scale and then non-uniform scale constraint, just like in 3ds Max. So that's pretty cool. They're making it not too hard on us. And as for everything in Maya almost, there is a hotkey for all of this. So the hotkeys, if you don't like going through the GUI here on the left, I'll tell you what they are. The first one for the move tool is Q. And if you'll notice here, the moment I hit the Q key, it takes me right back to the select tool. And then we have W. W is the hotkey for translate mode. And then we have E, which is the hotkey for rotate mode. And finally, R, which is the hotkey for scale. I always hit the Q key to take me back to square one because that's how Maya starts, and it's very useful. Okay, so you guys might have seen what I just did there. How many of you guys only have this view right here, a single camera view currently? Probably all of you unless you've done this. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the space bar, and if you'll notice, what has happened?
It made 4 different cameras.
Yes, it made 4 different camera views. This is what's referred to in almost every 3D software package as a 4 view. And the reason they call it a 4 view is because there's 4 windows. Typically in Maya, the way it goes is the top left view is your perspective viewport. The bottom on the right here is your side viewport. The bottom left is your front viewport, and the top left is your top viewport. So is this perspective viewport here the same as this top viewport? What's different?
It's showing the top view.
Yeah, but other than that, what's different?
One has a wireframe and one solid.
Okay, one's wireframe and one's solid. I can change that. All you have to do to change the properties of any of these windows is, if you'll notice, I'm moving my cursor over into each view, and I'm just left clicking, and it's highlighting the view in gray. That tells me that that's my active view. So if I want to maximize this view, so I'm going to make that top view my active view, and I want to maximize it, I'm going to hit the space bar. Now it's going to make that top view maximize. All right? Doesn't mean that the other views went away. They're still there. They're just not maximized. So if I hit the space bar, there I am. I'm back to my 4 view. If I want to see my perspective viewport maximized, you don't have to highlight it and make it active. You can actually just put your cursor over. So if I just put my cursor over that perspective view and hit the space bar, it's going to make that now my active view that's maximized. So it goes really fast, and you'll hear me as we move on in this class. You'll hear me up here flailing away and snapping between views. When I start showing you guys how to model stuff, I'll start moving really fast. And that's because this is really awesome. Maya allows you to navigate between your orthographic and your perspective viewports very quickly. Now there's the word that I was looking for. When I was asking Troy, what's the difference between this view and this view, I was hoping that someone would say, well, this one's an orthographic view and this one's a perspective view. Okay, so all of these views, this is your only perspective camera in the Maya 4 view. These other 3 are orthographic cameras. What do I mean by that? Yes, orthographic viewports are 2D only, so they only represent 2 dimensions, whereas a perspective view will represent all 3 dimensions. So I'm going to illustrate that. The most easiest way to illustrate that to you guys is to use this box here. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to highlight it up, and then I'm going to go to wireframe. So I'm going to hit the 4 key, and I'm looking straight at this box, and I'm going to actually click on the view cube and go to a left view. All right, so I'm looking at this cube from the left, but I'm also looking at this cube. I don't know if it's the left or not. Let's just say it is. I'm also looking at this cube from the front view here. On this one, why can I see all 4 of the sides, and on this one, all I can see is just the outline? Yes, the perspective viewport has perspective, and this one does not. This one, you can see the Z hiding there. So you can see Y, X. You can see the Z hiding there, but it's essentially non-existent because this viewport only represents kind of like a flattened, foreshortened view of my object. Now this is very, very useful when we get into modeling, and can also be useful for moving things and aligning stuff, okay? So this is your side ortho. They work the exact same way as the other views. If I hit the F key, I can frame the selection in them. You do have to do it individually, so I have to hover my cursor over each window. If you'll notice here, if I zoom out on this one, I hit F, it's not going to frame it in this one. I actually have to go over here and make this one active and then frame it up. You can also change the way that things are rendered in the ortho viewports by hitting the 5 key. Again, this is all different. These are all independently controlled in how they're shaded. And so by default, they're wireframe. So if you ever want to shade those, you're going to do it the exact same way we did it before. You're going to go over here and click on either shaded on the GUI, or you're going to hit the 5 key. Either way, it's going to do the trick for you. My orthos, I typically like to leave those in wireframe. And then I usually model in my shaded view and my perspective viewport. Okay, so that is the 3D interface in a nutshell. Let's go out here and let's go back, and we're going to now see what all of this stuff is. This is what I call the 80,000 feet view, kind of the overpass of what all this stuff is, so that you don't get all stressed out not knowing what something is, okay? So we have the File menu, and this is our text-based drop-downs. If you'll notice, right there under the File, we have this kind of like perforated strip here. If you ever see one of these little kind of rip-off lines that actually look like the perforated strip that if you've ever gotten a bill from like the power company or your landlord, and there's usually that strip, it means that you can tear that off. And so in Maya, this is also referred to as a tear-off. So the way we tear these off is you just select it, highlight your cursor over that perforated strip, click on it, and check it out. It tears it right off. Now the usefulness of this, as I'll show you, is in this right here. So this portion of the interface down here is called the time and range slider. And this section of the interface is typically reserved for animation. So these two guys right here and this guy here, and then all this stuff over here. We're not going to cover any animation in this class. So what you'll see me do from pretty much this day forward is I'm always going to free up my screen real estate. And I'm going to get rid of the time and range slider. And I'm going to do that by going here under the Display tab in the text-based drop-down. And I'm going to go to my tear off, and I'm going to tear that off. And under UI elements, I'm going to tear that one off. That's the one I really wanted to tear off. Under UI elements, I'm going to rip that one off. And I'm going to say hide my time slider and my range slider. And check it out. They're gone now. And now I've got a few more pixels on my interface that allow me to be able to see what I'm doing. Okay? Now, you might say, well, why do you have to tear that off to do that? The answer is because if I go to Display, UI elements, time slider, and range slider, I want to do both of those. Watch what happens. If I do time slider, boom, it does time slider. I got to go back into Window, go back into Display, UI elements, range slider, and do it again. So from time to time, it's going to be useful if you want to do multiple things on a menu set to just rip it off, and then you can just do them simultaneously, and then you just close it, and it goes back to its initial state. Okay? So that's kind of useful. If you'll notice here, we have right below the text-based dropdown, we have this little guy right here, and currently mine says polygons. So I'm going to click on this. This is a drop-down menu. So whenever you have a drop-down menu, you can left-click on it, and it'll show you all the underlying options. So I left-click on that, and you'll see here we have animation, surfaces, whoops, missed it, surfaces, dynamics, rendering, end dynamics, customize. Okay, so if you'll notice here, so I'm in polygons. Polygons is where we're mostly going to stay camped out in this class. Notice what's happening up here on the text-based menus. So just watch this. I'm going to go from polygons to animation. Did you see what happened there? Changed, right? So the way we want to look at this little guy here is this is actually modes. So Maya is so complicated in that it has so many features that they can't nest all the features in one interface. And so what they've had to do is they've had to group them. And so there's different modes in the software that have different functionality. The way you want to think of that is kind of like Maya has a bunch of other programs buried within itself. Okay? So we're going to stay in polygons mode. What you guys want to remember is if you look up here, or if you're up here in the text-based menus and you don't see what you're looking for, a good guess is that you're in the wrong mode. So you guys always just, for the beginning of this class anyway, make sure that that says polygon mode. Okay? You can also switch the modes using hotkeys. So F3 is polygon mode. F2 is animation mode. F4 is surfaces, which we'll get into a little bit later. F5 is dynamics, which we will not get into. And then F10 is rendering. I'm sorry, F6 is rendering, which we will get into a little later. F7 should be end dynamics. It's not. You don't need to know what end dynamics is anyway, because we're not going to use it. So you can switch between the modes. So if you ever want to get back to poly mode, what are you going to do? Hotkey wise. F3. Yeah, takes you right back. Okay, to the right of that drop down, we have some GUI items. The first one is for new scene. The second one is for open a scene. And the third one is for save scene. To the right of that, we have some other stuff which I'm going to not really get into. So I'm just going to skip those. And then we have some snaps. Who knows what a snap is? What is a snap?
Oh, it's going to connect to bond.
Snapping is where it's going to take my object and snap its movement to constrained set. So if I click on this one right here, this is snap to grid. So I'm going to hit W. If you'll notice here, so I have snap to grid turned on. When I turn snap to grid off, I'm going to just make this bigger. So I'm going to turn on snap to grid. Look at my icon here on my move, my transform gizmo. So when I turn on snaps, what happened? What's the diff? Went from a square to a circle, okay? And so that little circle tells me, hey dude, you're in snapping mode. And now wherever you move this thing, it's going to try to snap to it. So snap to grid is just going to try to snap it to increments of the grid. And so if I do that, you can see it's actually doing that, snapping right to the grid. I can turn that off. We have another one which is snap to curves. And so I'm actually going to have to make another object in order to show you that one. So what I did was I just selected my cube and I hit Control D, which makes a copy of it. And then in Maya, it's a little bit annoying. I really wish they would adopt the 3ds Max convention of just holding in the Shift key, but they won't do it. All right, so it's Control D, that makes a copy. Then the annoying thing is that if you're not used to it, you don't know you just made a copy, and you click away from it, and then you select it and try to move it, and you'll be like, why do I have two there? Because you duplicated it and you didn't know it. So you just have to be aware of that in Maya. All right. So the next snapping is snap to curve. And watch what happens if I go up here. In this case, I want to turn on my edge faces so I can show you how this works. And I'm going to middle mouse right here on this edge. And check it out. It's going to snap the center of my other object box to the edge of my other one. That's really nice. Now I'm going to warn you. It's supposed to work using the middle mouse. So you just move your cursor over the edge. And you want to kind of use that little box there as kind of like your crosshair, like you're aiming a rifle. And whatever that thing's got in focus and you middle mouse click to, it should snap to it. I use the word should because it doesn't always work. All right, so just be aware of that. It sometimes breaks. And I think it's got to do with the graphics card drivers. Not on Maya, it's more your graphics card driver kind of screws up from time to time. So that's very, very useful for aligning things. Okay, let's turn that one off. What's that? Okay, so I turned on my curves snap. And then I'm going to put my cursor over one of these edges on this one. And middle mouse, hold down and click. And it'll jump right to that edge. Now, I said should, right? Remember that? Because I just am trying to do this, and now it's not cooperating with me. And there is a long fix for that, which I don't want to get into today. But as we get better at this, I'll show you there's a way to get it to work every single freaking time, but it's too hard to explain. Okay? All right, so that is curve snapping, which is very useful when it works. Sometimes it doesn't want to work. And then we have vertex snapping. So again, I'm going to make a copy of this guy. If I turn on vertex snaps, check it out. Boom. Snap into my vertices. Awesome. If I want to scale this guy down so I can make that more evident. There it is. It's snapping to the vertices on my object. It's awesome. And then we have a new one, thank the Lord. This is a new feature. This one is snap to center of the selected object. So I'm going to try this. I haven't actually used this one. Let's see. I might have to make this thing live first. Let me try to do that. I'm going to have to research this one because that is not working the way I want it to. So I'll come back to this one and figure out how that works. That's a new feature, so I haven't actually had a chance to use it. But once I do show it to you, I'm pretty sure this is going to be pretty awesome. Okay, then we have snap to view planes. We're really not going to use that. And then we have another one here, which is very useful. And the final one is called make the selected object live. And what this thing does is this is a toggle. So what is a toggle? Yeah, a toggle is the very simplest representation of a toggle is a light switch. And a light switch is either what? On or off. So this button here, make object live, is either going to make your object live or make it unlive. So currently I can tell that my object is live because it's highlighted in this kind of hunter green. And if I click on this again, it's going to make it unlive. All right. Now the downside to making something live is that I'm going to use a sphere because this is going to show this a little bit better. So I'm going to make a sphere here. Making something live allows you to kind of draw on it. So I just selected my sphere. I clicked on make it live. And now watch what happens. So I'm going to go in here now and I'm going to say create. And I'm going to grab a polygon primitive. And the best one to show this off is the cone. So I'm going to click on cone. And now watch what happens. I'm going to make a cone here on the top of my sphere. All right. And you might be like, big deal, whatever. You'd be right. Watch what happens when I make a cone here again on the side. And then I do it again here on the side. You see what it's doing? It's actually building these primitives and making their center points so that they're basically radians off of the surface normals of this object. So there's basically just taking the surface normal of the underlying polygon and it's creating my new object and making the object center the same as that surface normal. Okay? And I don't want to get into surface normals. I showed you guys in principles. I'll show you all that a little bit deeper. But making something live for this first assignment is very useful because it allows you to kind of draw objects off of that object. Now the downside of making something live is that you can only make one object live at a time. So watch what happens if I select all of these guys and I click on make live. It gives me an error message. So you can only make one object live at a time, which is kind of annoying. Okay, so those are our snaps. There's hotkeys for each one of these, and they are X. So I'm going to select my first cone here I made. If I hold down the X key, watch what happens. I'm temporarily enabling snap to grid. Okay, awesome. But it's temporary, so the moment I let go of the X key, it takes me back to no snaps. So same thing when if I hold down the C key. So C key is going to temporarily enable snap to curve. And then the moment I let go of the C key, it's going to turn curve snapping off. Now the benefit to that is that whenever you click on these guys up here in the GUI, is that it keeps it on and leaves it on. By holding down the keyboard shortcuts, you can enable them temporarily without having to go back here and click off. So the keyboard shortcut for snap to vertex is V. So I'm holding down the V key, snap to vertex. The moment I let go, gone. This one, again, I don't know if there is a hotkey for that. I actually don't think there is. And then make live, there isn't one. So we'll just skip those two, come to this one. Okay, the render buttons in the interface. Rendering is basically just going to take a 2D picture of our 3D world. So if I click on this icon right here, render, that's going to render the current view. And it tries to make like a pretty picture of my 3D hardware view. It kind of bakes your 3D world down to a 2D image. So takes it from something that has 3 axes down to something that only has 2 axes. All right. This one we don't need to know. I'm going to skip that. And then this one here we're going to get into from time to time. This is called the render settings. And so render settings is where you can change all of your rendering attributes in the software. For this first assignment, we're not going to do anything with this. So I just want you to know what it is, and then I'm going to skip over it. Okay? Which brings us down here brings us over to the right. We have this new button, which is, I know it's new because it's highlighted in green. If I click on it, it's called the Modeling Toolkit. This thing kicks ass. I'm just going to tell you. I haven't researched it completely, but I have glossed over some of the new features in it, and there are some really killer features in here. So I'm going to be showing you guys this guy as we move on, but today I'm just going to hide it back. Okay, so this is a toggle again, because if I click on it, it's going to show the modeling toolkit. If I click on it again, it's going to hide the modeling toolkit. To the right of that, we have show hide attribute editor. So by default, Maya has the channel box open. If I click on this, it's going to give me the attribute editor. And then if you'll notice to the right here of the attribute editor, I have the option for either going to the channel box or the attribute editor, either way. Or I can just click this guy again and it'll hide that completely. Typically what I like is to have my attribute editor and my channel box open at the same time so that I can do that, cycle between them. And you might be asking yourself, well, what the hell is a channel box or an attribute editor? And the channel box is essentially a way for you to kind of get to the attributes of your object, similar to the modifier stack in 3ds Max. It allows you to get to kind of the construction history of your object, your translate and rotate. You can actually do through here. And then the attribute editor, the channel box is kind of like the cliff notes for your object. So it's the short version. And the attribute editor is kind of like the book. So cliff notes, book for your object. This is like every single modifiable attribute your object has on it. So every object that gets created in Maya is kind of born with attribute inputs that you can control through either the channel box or the attribute editor. And we'll get into that more in depth at a later date. Okay, cool thing though with the channel box, and this is worth showing, is that you can select your object and you can move it by just highlighting any of these inputs. So in this case, I'm going to select the translate Y, and I know that I have it selected because it's highlighted in blue. All right. Now if I just come over here, highlight this in blue, come over here into the interface, hold down my middle mouse button, drag left and right, or up and down in this case, if you'll notice, it's constrained moving my object in Y. And that's because I had Y selected. So now I'm going to select Z, and I'm going to do the same thing. And you'll holding down the middle mouse inside the interface, and it's going to move my object left and right. I can do the same thing for rotation. So this is kind of a nifty little feature that you guys are going to get more and more comfortable with as we go on. Okay, so moving on from the channel box and the attribute editor, we're going to come down here. This is the layer editor, and so I'm going to demonstrate this by creating a few different polygon primitives. I'll make a sphere here, make a cube. The layer panel allows us to organize our objects in Maya similar to the way that Photoshop layers work. Okay, so if I wanted to create a layer for this sphere, all I have to do is select the sphere, come over here into the display layers, and right here, this magic little button to the very right, if I hover on it long enough, it'll tell us what it does. It says create a new layer and assign selected objects. So what that's going to do if I click that is it's going to create a new layer and then assign the sphere to my new layer. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to click on it, and if you'll notice here, it creates a new layer. That layer is layer 1. And then the layer has this little flag here. And the first flag is for visibility. So I click on that V, watch what's going to happen. It's going to hide my object. If I click on that again, it's going to show it. So it's just a nifty little way for you to show or hide groups of objects or single objects. And then if I go to the right of it and I click on it, T stands for template. And now my geometry is kind of ghosted. And I can't really do anything to it. I can't manipulate it. That's because T templating locks your geometry. Makes it so you can't do anything to it, but you can still see it. If I click on that again, it's going to go to R. R stands for reference. Reference is where it'll shade it, but it'll lock it. So I can't do anything, but it's shaded now instead of ghosted. And then finally, back to the initial state, which is nothing. All right. So these are very useful. If I want to create a layer for my cube, I can click on this again, and now there's my new layer. If I want to rename my layer, I just double click on this, and I'm going to call this one cube underscore L for cube. And then same deal, I'm going to double click on this one. I'm going to call this one sphere underscore L for layer. And voila. These are very useful and will be useful for you even in the first assignment. Just a way for you to keep things organized. Okay? All right, and then down here we have the time and range sliders. Again, we don't really use those. So the first thing you're going to see me always do is come in here to display UI elements, and I'm going to say time slider, range slider, and hide those immediately. And then we have down here, we have the mel input. This is just a way for you to script stuff, and you can use text-based inputs to do certain things. I don't want to get into depth on that. I'll show you later what that does, but you're kind of not going to use that one either. Then we have the script editor, and that's this icon right here. Script editor allows you to basically get access to all the different functions. So in this case, why not just do it? Because it's only going to take me 5 seconds to show you how this works. So I'm going to say create. First thing I'm going to do is under the script editor, I'm going to say history clear all, so that eradicates everything that's in my script editor. And then I'm going to say create polygon primitives, and I'm going to do a sphere. And then I'm going to make that sphere, and right there. So what the script editor does here is it allows me to have code-based access to commands. So if I grab this piece of code right there, I'm going to delete that sphere. I paste this code into that mel command input and hit enter. It's going to do exactly what it just did. So there's gearheads who can actually run Maya right here from the command line and never touch the GUI. All right? That would be awesome if I could do that, but I can't. Okay, so that's the script editor. And then finally down here below is the hints. So this is just going to give you a hint of what tool you're in and what commands might be available. So if ever you go into a command and you don't know what to do next, you should always look down here to the bottom left, and it'll give you some sort of hint as to what you're supposed to do next. All right? That's essentially Maya in a nutshell. That's the 80,000 feet pass. Now let's go ahead and actually make something. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pause this for a second. So I'm going to go ahead and resume here. And before we do this, we want to, for this assignment, we're going to use the polygon primitives. And those are mainly located right here under create polygon primitives. You notice we have sphere, cube, cylinder, cone, plane, torus, prism, pyramid, pipe, and finally helix. Okay? Now, let's just say, what if I wanted to not have to go through the drop-down menu every time I wanted to create? Yeah, I could rip it off, but there's another way. So this right here, this guy, which I think I glossed over, I didn't really cover. This is called the shelves. And the shelves have GUI-based icons for a lot of the functions that are up here in the drop-down menu. But if you'll notice here, if I go all the way to the very end, there's a shelf here called custom. Custom is basically an empty shelf. And what that does is that allows you to populate that shelf with commands that you frequently use. So this is very useful. So we're going to use all the standard primitives for this assignment. So I want to show you guys how to make a custom shelf and add to it functions in the software. So I'm going to first, everyone wants to select their custom tab. And then we're going to go to create polygon primitives. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Control and Shift key simultaneously. And I'm going to click on sphere. I'm going to click on cube. I'm going to click on cylinder. I'm going to click on cone, plane, torus, prism, pyramid, pipe, and helix. And then I'm going to click out. If you'll notice, I didn't create any of those things. But what it did, though, was it populated my custom tab with icons for all of those functions. So this works for every single function that you can access through the drop-down menu. So if I wanted to say, create a button for edit, select all, I could go to edit. Let's see here, where is it? Select all, hold down my control and shift, and there we go. I just made a button for select all. If you want to delete that button, let's say, oh crap, I made an icon for something that I didn't want to do. All you have to do is middle mouse click on that icon and drag it to your trash can. And so this allows you to kind of make a quick tool set for frequently used functions, which is awesome. Okay, so let's talk about each one of these primitives, and just so you guys are familiar with the creation parameters. I'm going to click on Create Sphere. Boring. Just creates a sphere. If I want to edit the parameters of this sphere, so what if I want to make this sphere more dense or less dense? The way we're going to do that in 3ds Max is to go over into the modifier stack, right? Well, in Maya, the equivalent to the modifier stack is kind of the channel box, all right? So if I select my object and I come over here into the channel box, it's hidden out, all the inputs or the construction history on the object is hidden under the inputs. So I'm going to select my sphere and I'm going to go to inputs. I'm going to click on polysphere to expand those, and we have the radius. So I can change the radius. We have the subdivision axes, which I can change. And I can do that in two ways. I can just click in here and type. So I can go 8 and 8. Or I can highlight that and middle mouse drag, and it's going to change it interactively, which is kind of nice. Okay, so let's keep going down the line. That's it for spheres. They're pretty boring. That's all you can do. Now I'm going to do a box. So the typical creation for a box is the first click sets your base, and you can make that whatever size and shape you want. And then the next click is the height. If you want to make it completely square, you're just going to hold down the shift key, and that's going to make it completely square. Now if I want to get to the construction history on this box, where do I go?
Channel.
Channel box, okay. Always under the inputs. And I'm going to say polycube. Cool. We have width, I can change. Height, depth, subdivisions, I can add more if I want to. Adding more subdivisions would be useful if you wanted to use the snap to vertex to kind of place things on this precision-wise. All right, then we have the create cylinder. First click is the base, second click is the height. Again, if I wanted to do that and just make it uniform, I hold down the shift key, it's going to make it one size. The construction history for that, we have subdivisions, so we can increase or decrease subdivisions. If you want something to look smooth on a spherical object, how many subdivisions should you use? How much?
32 and up.
Yes, 32 and up. So I'm going to take that to 32. If you want it to be faceted, then you can go below that. So game res, typically, if you want to make something that represents a circle, they'll go as low as, I've seen it down as low as 3. But starting point is kind of 6, 8-ish for game res. 32 is television on up. 64 would be film res. I like 32 because it's pretty good. It's nice and in the middle. Not for games. No, 32 is not good for games. You want to do probably for like a high-res game, you're going to do something like a 16. 32 maybe if it's like the hero object, but for stuff in the background, you're going to want to go to 8, 16, stuff like that. Okay, so I'm going to keep going here. We've got a cone. Construction history on cone. We have axes, height, cap. This is kind of cool. Let's see. This one has some extra features. We can add subdivisions on the cap, but we can also say round cap on. Whoops. On. Oops. Come on. On. And check it out. It turns it into an ice cream cone.
That's a teardrop. Can't you do that to sphere? Like make a quick dome house?
No,
Do
you no.
the cylinder?
Yeah, in the cylinder you might be able to. Let's see here. Yes. So same deal in the cylinder. If we increase the subdivision caps and then go to round cap and say on, it'll make it into like a Tylenol. All right, so that's kind of cool. We also have a plane, so plane is cool. Not really much there other than increasing or decreasing the segments. Torus. This is Homer Simpson's donut. Okay. We have a twist, which I think, I always get confused on this one. Twist comes out when you give it kind of a low number of sides, like 4. And then if I click on the twist, then you can kind of change it to whatever you want. So you can kind of modify that to whatever shape you need it to be, which is kind of useful sometimes. Let's see what else we got here. We have prism, which is kind of stupid. I don't think there's much on it. And then we have pyramid. Actually, it's pyramid that's the dumbest one ever made. Because there's like nothing you can do with it. It can only have 4 sides, otherwise it's... Oh, that's funny. No, it's a Dodge logo. 3 sides, 4 sides, subdivision caps. This one I don't know why it allows you to have caps, because it doesn't allow you to round it, so there's no reason for the extra. And then tube, this one's awesome for like gun barrel, etc. And then helix. I'm just rifling through these because honestly the best way for you guys to learn them is to explore yourself. Okay, so now that we have covered, these are all the primitives that are available to you for the first assignment. Now let's go ahead and make something out of it. All right, so I'm going to select everything in my scene and delete it. And I just want to do something simple. We're going to do like a punk rock bracelet. So I'm going to come out here into my 4 view, and I'm framing up my orthographic viewports. I want to start in my front ortho, and I want to create a standard primitive. Luckily for me, I've already made icons for them, so I want to use a tube. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to hold down the X key to temporarily turn on snap to grid. And the reason for that is I want my tube to be centered perfectly in the interface there on my grid. Okay, and then the next click, I'm going to give this guy a little bit of depth. And then I'm going to enter to complete that command. I'm going to frame my little ring here. And let's just say that I want this application for this assignment is for film grade render. So, and I'm making kind of like a punk rock studded bracelet. So is this object currently film resolution?
No.
So what do I need to do to make it film run?
64.
Okay, so I'm going to select it. I'm going to go over here in inputs, and I'm going to increase the axes to 32 at a minimum. And if I wanted it to look really good, I'd take it to 64, which I'm going to do. All right, cool. So that's the first portion of our bracelet. Now we need a stud for it. So if you guys were to pick a shape out of the primitives to work for a stud, what would you guys say?
Cone.
The cone, right? Okay, so I'm going to come in here. I'm going to go to cone. Again, if you'll notice, I'm not going to draw my cone in my perspective viewport. And the reason for that is because I want to do this in a precision way. So I want to make sure that it's perfectly placed over my object. So I'm going to pop over here into the 4 view, and I'm going to go into my top ortho. I'm going to hold down that X key again. Actually, this time I'm going to hold down the V key. I'm going to say snap to vertex. And what I want to do is I want to snap the creation of this cone onto one of my vertices right there on my object. And then I'm going to give it some height. And there's my object. I'm going to do this again, though, in the perspective view, because I probably lost some of you there. All right, so I'm going to go and create a cone. I'm going to hold down my V key, which is going to temporarily enable snap to vertex. I'm going to click on this first vertex right here on the top of my bracelet. And I'm going to draw it. And then the second click is the height. And so by holding down the V key and snapping that, I know that my cone is perfectly placed right on top of that vertex in space, which is kind of nice. So then all I would have to do is kind of move this thing backward to center it up on my bracelet, and I'm golden. Now, that stud is a little bit too large for what I was trying to do. All right?
To the input mess of it.
Yeah, so I can come over here into the inputs, and I can change its radius if I want to. Okay? But if you'll notice, that kind of worked, but it's moving my object from its center, which is currently right in the middle of the object. So that's kind of annoying. What if I want this object to move from the base of itself instead of from the center? And I actually haven't shown this to you, so I need to show it to you. Yeah, I want to be able to move the center point. And so in order to get access to the center point of an object, you just hit the insert key. And the insert key is the key right above the delete key that says insert. And what that does is, if you'll notice, I'm going to hit it again. So the insert key is a toggle from object mode into pivot mode. And so now I'm in pivot mode, and I can tell that because my cursor here changed. And now that I'm in pivot mode, I'm going to pop over here into my ortho, and I'm going to move this guy, and I'm going to make my pivot point right there at the very base of my object. And then to get out of pivot mode, I just hit the insert key again. And now my object's pivot is right there at the base of itself. And what that's going to allow me to do now is that when I scale that object, it's going to scale from the bottom rather from the middle, so that I'm not going to constantly have to reposition this thing as I edit its shape. All right, that's number one. Okay, so now that we made one of our spikes, now we want to make a bunch of them, right? And so one way to do that would be to just select it and then hit Control D, right? And then I move it over, and then I kind of position it down, and then I kind of rotate it, right? Control D, whoops. Control D, I just want to illustrate how this is maybe not a great way to go. Move it over, rotate it. This is what is referred to in the industry as brute force, because you're not being very elegant, and it's going to take a lot of time to do it. And then if you'll notice, they're already kind of not uniformly spaced. So I want to show you guys a better way to do that. So I'm going to delete those guys. And then I want to duplicate this cone, but I want to do it in kind of a precision and mathematically elegant way. So the first thing I need to do is I need to change the pivot of my object. So again, I'm going to hit the insert key to get into pivot mode. I'm going to hold down the X key because that's going to temporarily snap to the grid. And so what I've done is I've changed the pivot on my spike to be in the center of the origin here. And then I'm going to hit insert key to get out of that. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control D, which just made a copy of my spike. I'm going to hit the E key for rotate. I'm going to rotate this a little bit. And now I'm going to use the channel box over here to kind of help me. So I just rotated this guy a little bit, and I'm looking over here, and it's rotating in Z. And so it's rotated in Z a negative 13.073 degrees. Now, if I want this to divide equally, so I want an equal number of spikes, I have to pick a number that's going to divide equally into 360. So I'm going to choose, I'm just going to kind of get it to one that looks good. So let's just say 20 looks pretty good. So I'm going to say -20. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you this as magic first. Now that I've done that, I'm going to hit Shift D. And I made one extra one. And there we go. Now I want to explain how I actually did that so that you guys can do it. Okay, so, yep. All right, so I'm going to select this guy. I first went to pivot mode. I held down the X key. I snapped its pivot to the origin. I then hit, with the object selected, Control D, which duplicates it. And then I rotated it just a little bit in Z until I got something I liked. So basically, I looked at it. I thought 15 was too close. And I'm trying to pick an increment that divides into 360 equally. So I thought 15 was too close, so I like 20. So I'm going to do -20. And then what I did was I held down the Shift key and I hit the D key. And what that does is that is called duplicate with transform. So holding down the Shift and hitting the D key again. And as many times as I hit that, it's going to make a copy. And it's going to rotate that copy a -20 degrees. All right, now I'm going to, I want to show you again, and this time I'm going to break it. So I'm going to make it so it doesn't work, which I'm sure some of you guys have found. So again, I select the object I want. I moved its pivot to the origin. Okay. Then I hit Control D to make a copy. I rotated it a -20 degrees in Z. And then watch what happens this time. So I told you guys the hotkey for duplicate with transform was Shift D, right? Watch what happens this time. So I'm going to deselect that object for a second. And then I'm going to reselect it. And I'm going to hit Shift D again. What's happening? I'm hitting Shift D a bunch of times. Do you see this? Look at this right here. I keep hitting Shift D. What's that doing?
It's making more.
Holy shit, I can't stop, right? I just made about 40 copies of that object, okay? And that's because Maya is tricky and she doesn't move it. So there's no way for you to know that Maya is making more and more copies of that object unless you know what to look for, which is what I'm showing you. So the beauty of that, though, is that all those objects are right on top of each other. So if I marquee select, I can select them all and delete them. What happens if I just click select and hit delete?
It's just gonna do it one by one.
It's going to do them one by one, okay? So I want to marquee select to select them all, and then I'm going to hit delete to delete them all. Okay, so what was the difference in the way that I did that time versus the way I did it before? I'll show you. So I selected the object. I hit Control D to make a copy. I then hit the E key to rotate it, -20 degrees. Yeah, the difference was the second time I deselected the object. And Maya is a tricky little mistress because she says the moment you let go of that object, I don't know what you did to it. So if you're going to make the duplicate with transform work, you have to do it in one swoop. So without deselecting it, now I can hit Shift D and make as many copies as I need, and there we go. Did everyone get it? Okay.
Why how do you make it snap to a certain percentage?
So the question was, how do you make it snap to like incremental percentage increases? And the the short answer to that is this. So I'm going to just go ahead and undo back to my original. It's called discrete rotate. So if I go ahead and duplicate this and I double click on the rotate icon right here, it opens up the settings. And if I turn on, where is it? Discrete rotate, it gives me an option for a step size. And then I can set that step size to whatever I want. So if I want 20-degree increments, I can turn that on. And now what it's going to do is it's going to constrain my rotation to only snap to 20-degree increments. Now that's cool, but it's also kind of a long way to go because I had to double click on this, turn on discrete rotate, then turn on the snaps to a value that I wanted. And it's just typically a little bit easier. Most Maya users will do it the way I did it the first time, where you basically just duplicate it, because this is a lot less work. You duplicate it, you move it a little bit, you figure out which dimension it's going in, and then you just sharpen it up in here, and then Shift D. It just goes a lot faster. So if you like the discrete rotate, you can go in and set it up. But typically, most Maya users will just do it through the channel box by inputting it manually. Okay, another cool feature inside of Maya that this is kind of like the final thing I'm going to show you guys is that you can also group objects to be manipulated as one, all right? And so if you'll notice, these are all separate spikes on a separate bracelet. What if I wanted to make these guys all act the same or have the same pivot point and all move as one? The way you do that is I'm going to first select them all, and then I'm going to hit Control G, which is the keyboard shortcut for group. And now what I've done here is I've made this into one object, with the beauty of that they're still separate pieces. So I can still edit them individually, or I can move them as a group. The way that the group works is if you select any one of the objects in the group and hit the up arrow a couple times, it'll take you to the top of the group. So groups are very cool and very powerful because they allow you to, you know, in 3ds Max when you group something, it sucked because you had to ungroup it. In Maya, you don't have to do that. You just have to remember what you've grouped and kind of know, oh, I grouped that, and I can get up the chain, so up the hierarchy, by just hitting the up arrow a couple times. And if you'll notice here, I click on this one and it says P cone 5, right? I select on this one, it says P pipe 1. But if I click on any of these guys and hit up, it takes me up to the top of the chain, which is group 1, and I can name this one Punk Bracelet. Okay, and then now the cool thing about groups is I can actually duplicate this guy. Yeah, whatever I want. Now maybe this is my new group, okay? So now I'm going to grab these guys and I'm going to group them. And I'm going to say modify center pivot, and it's going to center it on the group. Now I'm going to change the pivot point, right? Whoops. Here. And then I want to make something that looks pretty mean. So I'm going to hit Control D. I'm going to make a copy. I'm going to rotate it up. Okay, I'll do -75. And then if I hit Shift D, okay, and on and on and on. So I'm going to say modify center pivot again, and then I'm going to duplicate it, and now I'm going to rotate it down 90 degrees. And I know I'm making something nonsensical, but I hope that you guys can wrap your head around this. And these are the building blocks that I can use to make something cool. That's basically it. We've covered creation of geometric primitives, moving your pivots, grouping things, duplicating things. These are kind of what you're going to use snapping in the first assignment. You can also, I will allow you guys to do this, because the construction history in Maya is a little lame and it doesn't let you do nearly what you can in 3ds Max. So we're going to get into this next week, but I'll show you guys a little. Yes, 2 weeks from now. When I say it, in next week's class that we would have if it weren't a holiday. Yes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to do some sub-object modeling, very basic stuff. If you want to delete some of the polygons, let's say you don't want this entire pipe here, you can simply right-click on the object and go into face mode, and then select some of the faces that you want to delete and delete them.
So that's like convert mesh, modify.
Yes, this is sub-object modeling. I'm going to allow you guys to subtractively edit your objects if you need to. So if you need to delete a piece of something in order to make it work, go for it.
So where's the bevel and outline and insert?
Next lecture. Yeah, all that stuff. I don't want anyone to use any sub-object modeling on this exercise. So sub-object modeling is anything you do at the vertex level, the face level, the edge level. You can delete stuff for the first assignment. And then for the next lecture, when we get into modeling the human hand, we're going to get into all of the sub-object stuff. So sub-object polygon, control cage modeling. The hand is going to be a watertight mesh. Yeah, so all of that is coming. For this first assignment, you're just going to make something very cool, a complicated object from primitive shapes. Like I showed you guys on the examples. Typically people do like robots, spaceships. Use your imagination though. I like to see cool stuff I haven't seen before. One girl did this awesome like diorama with these like flying, it was like flying blimps, and she had this whole battle scene carried out, and the castle was like disintegrating, was getting bombed with a cannonball, and was exploding. It was really awesome. She said she spent like 8 hours on it. So the goal for this first assignment, honestly, is just to get you guys acclimated to Maya. I don't want you to blow it off. I don't, if you knock it out of the park, you put 20 hours into this first assignment, just remember to pace yourself. Don't burn yourself out on, the first project. It's an 11-week course. Believe me, there's an assignment due every week. You're gonna get sick of it. So my advice is just, spend a good 8 hours. Get to know the software, do something cool. Yeah. Yes, you can download a student version of the software. I'll go ahead and do it right now. What I usually do is, because sometimes they change the location of this, so I always just go to Google and type Autodesk Maya student version. And then right here, this is the link, Autodesk student community version, or version, download, and I guess it is version software because you're going to install. And then I think you have to enroll now. They're going to make you go through like a enrollment process. There's free software. Let's see here. And then, where is it? Somewhere in here. There it is. Maya. Click on that. They're going to make you create an account. You're going to sign in. And then you're going to download the version for your OS and all that and install it. I will warn you guys, most students come in here, not most, some students come in here and they want to run this thing on a Mac using Boot Camp. I don't recommend it. It's gonna, if you're a gearhead and you want to go through that and get it all set up. But what I don't want to see you guys do is, come in here 3 weeks from now and be like, I still can't get Boot Camp installed with Maya. Or wait, no, I'm thinking Macs. Sorry, Maya. Actually, there is a Mac version. I forgot about that. Okay, so that was my spiel for 3ds Max. So disregard that. But I don't want you guys to, spend time on technical stuff that you could spend on modeling. All right. Cool. That's it. So good luck to y'all. And I made a video for this, so you won't be in the dark. Awesome. We'll see you guys next week.